The morning sun was soft on her face as she stepped outside, expecting to see her little silver car waiting by the curb, just like always. It had been hers for over a decade. It wasn't fancy. It didn't have heated seats or touch screens. But it had taken her to every grocery store run, every late-night pharmacy trip, every moment when she just needed to drive and cry alone. She fumbled in her purse, her fingers brushing the familiar keys. Her eyes searched the street. The space where the car had always rested was empty. She blinked, then stepped farther down the sidewalk, thinking maybe she had parked it somewhere else. But no. It was gone. She turned slowly, unsure if she was dreaming, if she had forgotten something. That's when he walked out onto the porch, her son, holding a cup of coffee like it was just another lazy morning. His hair was still messy from sleep. He didn't look worried. He didn't even look guilty. "I sold it," he said simply. "I needed the money more than you needed the car." His voice didn't carry anger. It was calm. Cold. Final. She felt her body freeze. The keys were still in her purse. He had taken it without them. Had planned this without her. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. What could she say? Her hands began to tremble slightly, still wrapped around the useless metal keys. Her car. Her independence. Her last bit of freedom. Gone like it meant nothing. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. Her heart did all of that silently inside her chest. She looked at him, this boy she had raised, loved, sacrificed for, and saw a stranger. The shame was loud in her ears. She felt like a child again, small and powerless, standing in the middle of the road with neighbors peeking through windows, pretending not to see. She turned away from him. She didn't ask why. She didn't argue. She just walked slowly back toward the house. Each step felt heavier than the last. Her hands slipped into her sweater pockets, trying to hide the shaking. The key stayed in her purse, useless now. The door clicked softly behind her. The house felt colder. Quieter. Like it was holding its breath. And so was she. She hadn't planned to raise him alone, but life doesn't always wait for perfect plans. He was just a baby when his father left, too small to understand what was happening, too innocent to feel the cracks forming in their home. But she had understood. She'd felt every break, every empty chair at the dinner table, every unanswered phone call. Still, she held her baby tighter and promised him he'd never feel the missing pieces. She worked nights at the diner, her feet aching by sunrise, her body too tired to sleep. Some mornings she'd change out of her uniform in the back seat of her car, brush her hair with a travel comb, and head straight to the school drop-off line with a smile. He never saw the fatigue. He just saw her waiting with his lunch, every single day. She didn't buy new coats in the winter. Hers had a broken zipper for 3 years, but his was always warm, thick, brand new. When his shoes got too tight, she skipped the groceries that week. When field trip forms came home, she quietly picked up an extra shift. And when he got sick, she sat by his side all night, whispering lullabies from a chair that dug into her back. She cooked dinner even when she wasn't hungry. She packed his school lunches before making her own coffee. She gave him the last slice of pie on every holiday. And when college applications rolled in, she emptied a savings account she'd quietly built since the day he was born. She never complained. Not when the bills were high. Not when the car broke down on the way to work. Not even when she caught the flu and still cleaned the house, did laundry, and made his favorite soup. She held her pain close, where it wouldn't show. She wore love like armor, stitching it together with late nights and silent prayers. Every morning, she packed away a little more of her own life to build his. When he cried over a broken toy, she fixed it. When he lost friends, she baked him cookies and watched cartoons with him. When he didn't make the team, she cheered him on twice as hard. He never knew how many times she wanted to cry on the bathroom floor but stood up anyway. He never saw her count pennies behind his back at the grocery store or walk an extra mile just to save gas. And when he grew older and started drifting, she stayed patient. She told herself it was normal, that all boys pull away. She still made his bed when he forgot, washed his clothes without a word, and kissed his forehead when he left the house, even if he didn't turn back. All she ever wanted was for him to have more than she did. More chances. More happiness. More ease. So, she gave and gave, until the lines on her face deepened and her hands grew rough. But her heart stayed soft, for him. Every small act, every quiet moment of sacrifice, was her love written in real time. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just steady. Just hers. And now, the boy who once slept curled against her chest had sold her car without asking. The same car that had carried them to doctor appointments, birthday parties, and late-night drives when he couldn't sleep. The same car she had used to get to work, to run errands, to live. He took it like it meant nothing. Like she meant nothing. And maybe that's what hurt the most. Not the medal. Not the money. But the forgetting. The erasing. The way years of sacrifice had vanished without even a second thought. It was a few days later when she learned the truth, not by accident, not through gossip, but by witnessing it herself. She had been folding laundry in the quiet of the house, trying to keep her mind busy, when a picture popped up on her phone. It was posted publicly, no shame, no care. Her son and his fiancée were smiling, arms wrapped around each other, standing on a beach with clear blue water behind them. He was wearing sunglasses she hadn't seen before. She was holding up her hand, flashing a ring that looked far too expensive for someone who'd said he was struggling financially. The caption read, "Grateful for a fresh start. We deserve this." Her throat tightened as she looked at the comments, friends congratulating them, cheering them on. One even wrote, "Glad you made it, after all you've sacrificed." She stared at the screen like it might change. But it didn't. The truth sat there, loud and clear. Her car, the one she used for doctor appointments, grocery trips, and visits to the pharmacy, had been sold to fund a romantic getaway and a flashy ring. He hadn't needed the money to pay bills or cover an emergency. He had used it to impress someone. To play the part of a man who had it all together. And he had done it by quietly stripping her of the one thing that gave her a little freedom. She didn't cry. Not this time. She put the phone down, folded the last shirt with shaking hands, and sat still for a long moment. The air in the room felt different now, thinner, heavier. She wasn't just hurt. She felt erased. Forgotten. Like she had been stepped over to help someone else shine. She waited until he got home that evening. He came in laughing, texting someone, barely glancing in her direction. She waited until he tossed his keys on the table and sat down to scroll through his phone like he had all the time in the world. Then, quietly, she asked, "Did you use the money from my car for the trip?" He looked up, annoyed, like she'd interrupted something important. "Yeah," he said, shrugging. "And the ring too." She kept her voice calm. "Why didn't you tell me?" He looked at her like she was being dramatic, like she was overreacting to a small inconvenience. "You weren't doing anything with it anyway," he said flatly. That sentence hit her like a slap. Not loud. Not cruel in tone. Just empty. Like her life, her needs, her presence, they were nothing. Just background noise in his story. Something useless to be cleared out. She stood still, breathing slow. She thought about every ride she had given him when he was little. Every time she sat in that same car, waiting outside practices, appointments, schools. She thought about how she used to warm up the engine early in the winter so he wouldn't be cold. She thought about the fast food wrappers left in the back seat after his late-night cravings, the music he'd play too loud, and how she never once asked him to stop. And now, he stood there, grown and distant, saying she wasn't doing anything with it anyway. Her heart didn't break all at once. It cracked slowly, like ice splitting under pressure. She didn't shout. She didn't plead. She just looked at him one last time, nodding slightly, as if sealing something inside her chest. Then she turned, walked toward the hallway, and gently closed the door to her room behind her. There was no slam. No scene. Just a soft click that said everything. She sat on the edge of her bed, the light from the hallway spilling in under the door. The sentence repeated itself in her head like a cruel lullaby. You weren't doing anything with it anyway. Over and over. Until it didn't sting anymore. Until it turned into something else, something sharp, something strong. She folded her hands in her lap and whispered to herself, not out of weakness, but clarity. Okay. She finally understood. She wasn't loud. But she was listening now. The days grew long and quiet. Her phone, once alive with his messages, quick updates, casual questions, little bits of life, stayed silent. At first, she told herself he was busy. Maybe work had picked up. Maybe they were still traveling. Maybe he was settling into the new apartment. She left the porch light on just in case he stopped by. She cooked a little extra at dinner, putting aside a plate he never came for. And every time the phone buzzed, her heart jumped a little, only to fall again when it was just a promotion or a spam call. There were no "Hi, Mom" texts. No photos. No thank yous. Not even an apology. She waited. A week passed. Then two. On the third week, she decided to stop wondering. She took a bus across town, one she hadn't ridden in years, to his place. She carried a small tin of cookies she'd baked, hoping maybe a soft gesture would open the door. She knocked and heard laughter inside, then the sound of footsteps. His fiancée opened the door, phone in hand, wearing workout clothes and earbuds still around her neck. She looked surprised to see her, but not warmly so. "Oh, hey," she said, not even moving to let her in. "He's not here." There was no hug. No offer to sit. No invite inside. Just a half smile and awkward silence. She held up the tin of cookies. "I made these, just wanted to stop by." The girl took the tin without looking at it. "Cool. I'll let him know." Then she shut the door slowly, not rude, not angry, just indifferent. Like she wasn't even someone worth remembering. She stood there for a moment, the sound of laughter still floating from inside. Then she turned, walked back down the stairs, and made her way to the bus stop, hands empty, eyes focused on the ground. She didn't cry. She was too tired for that. Too used to it. When she got home, the porch was quiet. The driveway still empty. A soft breeze moved through the trees, but the silence around her felt thick, like a blanket she couldn't pull off. She sat on the porch swing, gripping the edge with both hands, her feet barely touching the ground. She looked out at the spot where her car used to be. For years, that car had been a part of her rhythm, her way to reach the world. Now it was just an empty space. A reminder of how quickly things could be taken. Of how quickly people could disappear. She waited outside until the sun dipped low. The houses around her began to light up one by one. Somewhere down the street, a child laughed, and a dog barked. Life was happening everywhere except where she sat. Her porch stayed dark. Her phone stayed silent. Nobody came. Nobody called. She thought of all the years she had spent pouring herself into others. How her love was always quiet, always patient, always enough, until it wasn't. Until it was forgotten. She wondered if maybe she had made it too easy. If her silence had been mistaken for weakness. If her sacrifices had faded from their memory the second they were no longer needed. The porch swing creaked as she shifted. Her bones ached in ways that had nothing to do with age. She closed her eyes and listened to the wind, hoping for a sign, a sound, anything. But all she heard was the absence. The deep, hollow space where a thank you should have lived. Where love should have stayed. And so she sat, watching an empty driveway, holding nothing but the weight of being left behind. One morning, as she was going through an old drawer looking for a screwdriver, she found something she hadn't seen in years. A faded manila envelope, wedged beneath a stack of forgotten instruction manuals and takeout menus. Her hands paused. The envelope felt stiff, like it hadn't been touched in a long time. She pulled it out, sat at the kitchen table, and opened it slowly, almost cautiously. Inside were savings bonds, real ones, printed and official, still in her name. Her breath caught. She turned them over carefully, reading the dates. She had bought them in her early 30s, back when she believed in long-term dreams. Some were nearly mature. She hadn't thought about them in decades. She'd forgotten they even existed. And they weren't the only thing in that drawer. Beneath the bonds, folded tightly in a legal envelope, was a deed. Property. A small piece of land her aunt had left her long ago, tucked in a rural town she hadn't visited in years. It was still in her name. Untouched. Unclaimed. Still hers. Along with the papers was another item, a power of attorney document she had signed with her lawyer years ago. She had given her son some rights to help with her affairs when she thought he would care for her. But as she read further, she noticed something she'd missed before. A clause. She had the power to revoke at any time. With one signature, she could take it all back. She leaned back in her chair, heart beating steady now, not fast, not frantic. Just steady. She wasn't empty. She wasn't done. There were still things in her name. Things that mattered. She still had ground under her feet. That afternoon, she walked to the library to use the public computer and find the number of the old law office she remembered from years ago. She wasn't even sure if they were still in business. But when the phone picked up, a familiar voice answered, Mr. Lewin, the kind-eyed lawyer who'd helped her after her aunt passed. She introduced herself, unsure if he would remember her. But he did. Of course I remember you, he said warmly. How've you been? She hesitated. Trying to remember who I used to be. He chuckled gently. Well, you always were one of the strongest people I'd met. You just didn't brag about it like the rest. They set up a meeting. A few days later, she walked into the same office building she hadn't stepped foot in for over a decade. The elevator smelled the same. The carpet still had that soft, muffled feel under her shoes. Mr. Lewin greeted her at the door, a little older now, a little grayer, but still carrying that calm presence that made people feel safe. He looked over the documents she'd brought. Read them carefully. Asked a few questions. And then he looked up and said something she hadn't heard in a very long time. You still have choices. You're not stuck. Those words cracked something open inside her. She didn't cry, though her eyes shimmered. She just nodded, slowly, holding on to the feeling. He explained the steps she could take. How she could reclaim what was hers. How she could protect herself from here on. It wouldn't be immediate. But it would be possible. And for the first time in what felt like forever, she smiled. Just a little. Not the kind of smile that begged for anyone's approval. Not the kind that masked sadness. It was small. Real. Quiet. But it was hers. She walked out of the office with her coat buttoned and her steps light. The wind didn't feel quite as cold that day. Her hands, usually tucked deep into her pockets, swung gently at her sides. She wasn't sure what tomorrow would look like, but she knew one thing, she wasn't invisible. She wasn't powerless. Somewhere along the way, she had let herself believe she was done. That her worth had expired the moment they stopped thanking her. But she wasn't done. she had forgotten parts of herself. Now, she was starting to remember. It started with a call from the bank, though it wasn't her phone that rang. It was his. He had walked into the branch that morning with confidence, paperwork in hand, expecting things to move quickly. The loan officer had smiled politely, but when she typed in the information and saw the name he was trying to use as co-signer, his mother's, her expression changed. "I'm sorry," she said firmly, "but the account has been updated. You no longer have access to these funds, and her name has been removed as an eligible co-signer." He didn't understand. He fumbled through his bag, pulling out old copies of documents. "She gave me permission, she has power of attorney." But the woman shook her head. "Not anymore. That was revoked last month." The paper in his hand suddenly felt like ash. He left the bank angry, walking fast, calling her number again and again. But she didn't answer. She was busy that day. At the lawyer's office, signing the final paperwork to transfer the title of the house she had lived in for 30 years. The house he had grown up in. The one he told his fiancée they'd move into once the time was right. He had assumed it would be his one day, just like he had assumed her money was his to spend, her car his to sell, her love his to use. But assumptions don't make ownership. She had found a buyer, an older couple who reminded her of who she used to be. The paperwork was clean. The money wired. And just like that, the house was no longer part of her past or his future. She had found a smaller apartment across town, one with a sunny porch and a view of the park. It didn't carry memories. It didn't carry expectations. Just space. Space for peace. She finally picked up when he called again that evening. His voice came through sharp, demanding. "Why did you cancel everything? Why didn't you tell me?" She let the silence stretch for a moment. Then she answered quietly, calmly. "Because you didn't ask when you took the car." He scoffed. "That was different. I needed help. You weren't using it." Her voice didn't rise. It stayed steady. "I was using it. You just didn't see it." He cursed under his breath. "You had no right to sell the house." She paused again. Then said the only thing she needed to, "You sold my car. I sold my trust." And she hung up. She sat by the window afterward, watching the sky turn purple as dusk set in. There was no weight in her chest. No guilt. Just stillness. She had spent years giving, offering pieces of herself like gifts he never thanked her for. But now, the giving was done. This wasn't revenge fueled by rage. It was justice, rooted in clarity. He had taken something from her without asking, assuming she was too weak, too quiet to stop him. But silence wasn't weakness. It was patience. And when patience ends, it doesn't explode. It removes. She had removed the access, the inheritance, the illusion. There was nothing left for him to misuse. No more silent acceptance. No more looking the other way. She had trusted him once. He had cashed that trust for a vacation and a ring. Now, he would see what life looked like without it. She poured herself a cup of tea and carried it outside to her new porch. The neighborhood children were playing across the street, and a small bird landed near her feet. The world felt simple again. Her name, once tangled in someone else's plans, was now hers again. Clean. Protected. She didn't need to shout. She just needed to act. The call started a week later. First, it was just one. Then another. Then they came every day. He didn't leave long messages, just 1 or 2 words at first. "Call me. Please. Let's talk." Then longer ones followed. Apologies that didn't quite sound like apologies. Explanations that danced around the truth. "You caught me off guard. It wasn't how I meant things to go. You misunderstood." His voice, once so sharp and cold, now sounded uncertain. But she didn't answer. Not once. Next came the email, from his fiancée. Polite, but patronizing. "He's been under a lot of stress lately," it read. "He didn't mean to hurt you. It's not fair to punish him like this. You're his mother." There was no mention of the car. No mention of the trip. Just a plea for forgiveness written in a tone that assumed she owed them something. She didn't respond. Then his friends started chiming in, messages on social media, texts from numbers she didn't recognize. One even said, "He's really broken up about all this. You raised him better than to hold a grudge." Another one wrote, "He made a mistake. Don't ruin your relationship over something small." Small. That word stung more than the others. Small, like all the years of sacrifice meant nothing. Like her trust had been pocket change. Like her silence should return with a smile and forgetfulness. But it didn't. She read every message once, then deleted them. The truth was simple now. She had spent her life absorbing pain quietly, always giving second chances, always assuming love meant forgiving everything. But now, love looked different. It looked like letting go of what hurt. It looked like protecting herself. She had nothing left to prove. She sat in her chair one quiet afternoon, holding her phone in her hand. Another call came in. His name flashed on the screen. No message this time. Just the ring. She stared at it for a moment. Not with anger. Not with sadness. Just clarity. And then, with the soft press of her thumb, she blocked the number. No warning. No goodbye. Just peace. And in that moment, she felt something shift. For the first time in years, she felt lighter. Like a knot had loosened in her chest. Like she had stepped out of a room filled with noise and finally closed the door behind her. There was no guilt. No second guessing. Only stillness. Only quiet that felt earned. She stood, made herself a cup of tea, and walked out to the porch. The breeze played with the ends of her hair, and somewhere nearby, a wind chime sang softly. She looked out at the trees, at the world still turning, and smiled. Not because someone told her to. Not because she had to. But because she finally wanted to. They could call. They could beg. They could send messages full of excuses and charm and pressure. But she wasn't listening anymore. She didn't need to fight back. She had already won. She sat by the window in her new apartment, soft sunlight warming her hands as she cradled a cup of tea. Outside, the world moved gently, cars passed, birds fluttered from tree to tree, a child rode a bike with wobbly confidence. She watched it all with a calm heart, no longer waiting for someone to walk through the door or call with half-hearted apologies. The silence wasn't hollow anymore. It was healing. She thought about the years that had come before, the long nights, the quiet sacrifices, the love she had poured into her son like water into a growing plant. She remembered the meals she skipped so he could eat, the holidays where her joy came only from watching him unwrap gifts she could barely afford. She had been there through every scraped knee, every heartbreak, every uncertainty. And when he fell silent as an adult, when he turned away, when he sold her car without blinking, she blamed herself. For a long time, she had believed maybe she had done too much. Given too easily. Maybe that's why he never learned to appreciate it. Maybe she had made herself too available. Too open. Too dependable. Maybe she had made it too easy to forget her value. But now, sitting here in the stillness, with the weight of his expectations no longer pressing on her shoulders, she began to see things differently. She wasn't the burden. She wasn't the problem. She had loved with her whole heart, and while others may have taken advantage of that love, it didn't mean she was wrong for giving it. It meant they were wrong for mistaking kindness for weakness. She had been a mother in every sense of the word. She had stood when she was tired. She had smiled when she was breaking. She had held together a world that was always on the edge of falling apart, and she had done it with grace. The mistake wasn't in her giving. It was in expecting that the people she gave to would always give back. But now she understood. Love wasn't meant to leave you empty. Love wasn't meant to silence your needs or strip you of your dignity. Love, real love, was mutual. Respectful. Kind. She had loved her son deeply. That hadn't changed. But she had also learned to love herself, perhaps for the first time in her life. And that love told her the truth: she didn't deserve to be used. She didn't deserve to be forgotten. She didn't deserve to be treated like her only worth came from what she could give. She sipped her tea slowly, watching the steam curl into the air. She thought about how far she had come. She had found her voice, not by shouting, but by choosing silence over begging, strength over tears, action over hope. She had rebuilt her boundaries, reclaimed her life, and started again, not bitter, not vengeful, just wiser. And in that wisdom, there was peace. She smiled faintly, not for anyone else to see, but for herself. A smile that whispered, "You made it." A smile that knew the pain had changed her, but it hadn't broken her. If anything, it had shown her who she truly was beneath the weight of everyone else's needs. Not a burden. A blessing. And now, she would move forward, not waiting for love to come back around, but carrying her own love wherever she went. She didn't need to be needed. She didn't need to be thanked. She just needed to be free. And at last, she was. The apartment was quiet, filled with the soft rustle of evening. She moved through the kitchen with a kind of grace that only comes with solitude, unhurried, steady, sure. A small pot simmered on the stove, filling the air with the comforting scent of garlic and herbs. She wasn't cooking for anyone else tonight. Not to impress, not to comfort, not to prove her love. Just for herself. A simple meal, her favorite, nothing extravagant. Just enough. She set the table with care, not out of habit, but out of intention. One plate. One fork. One glass of water with lemon. A cloth napkin folded neatly beside the plate. She reached for the small candle on the shelf by the window and lit it, its tiny flame flickering to life, casting a warm glow across the room. She turned off the overhead light and stood for a moment in the golden hush. Everything felt still. Not lonely. Not sad. Just still. Just hers. She sat down and began to eat. Slowly. Mindfully. Each bite tasted fuller, richer, not because of the recipe, but because she was present. Because nothing was being taken from her. No one was interrupting. No one was judging or needing or ignoring. For the first time in years, there was no noise. No disappointment. No strained conversation where her words were filtered for peace. Just her and the soft sound of a spoon against the edge of the bowl. Her shoulders dropped gently, her body relaxing without permission. She didn't even realize how long she'd carried tension until it began to release. There was a time when dinner meant chaos. Arguments, silence, the scraping of plates as people came and went without a glance. She had cooked 1,000 meals that were never really tasted. She had served her heart on plates that came back empty and cold. But tonight was different. Tonight was quiet. And full. She didn't rush to clear the table. She didn't move to wash the dishes right away. She sat there, sipping her water, listening to the small crackle of the candle. Her thoughts were calm, her chest no longer tight with questions or regrets. She had made it through the storm. Not untouched, but unbroken. Outside, the city moved on. People walked by. Lights flicked on and off in the windows across the street. But in her little corner of the world, time stood still in the best way. She had claimed this space. Not just physically, but emotionally. She had claimed her peace. Her voice. Her right to be full, without anyone else at the table. When the candle burned low and the last sip was gone, she looked around and smiled. It wasn't the kind of smile meant for anyone else. It wasn't for show. It came from a place deep within her, the kind that only grows after pain has been faced and walked through with dignity. She stood, carried her plate to the sink, and rinsed it gently. Then she turned off the light, walked to her chair by the window, and curled up with a soft blanket. And for the first time in a very long time, she didn't feel empty after dinner. She felt full. Full of strength. Full of clarity. Full of herself, in the way she always should have been. This time, she ate at her table. Alone, and free.